Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
Borno province in Nigeria is a far-off land of which we know little, not least because what happens there is of virtually no importance to the Western media and the political class it echoes.
In the same week that 17 people died in terrorist outrages in Paris, 2,000 people died in another terrorist outrage in Borno. No hashtags for them, indeed virtually no coverage of any kind at all. Last year there was a brief flurry of concern about the victims of Boko Haram, and for a couple of weeks everyone from Michelle Obama in the White House to Salma Hayek on Hollywood's red carpet held up these placards showing #BringBackOurGirls. But it didn't last long. The caravan moved on and the 276 girls never came back.
Boko Haram, literally books are forbidden, is a savage group of throat cutters who, whilst drowning every Islamic principle in blood, have recently declared their allegiance to the so-called caliph hidden away in the Iraqi desert. The Nigerian state seems incapable of defeating them, so much so that the president, the inaptly named Goodluck Jonathan, managed to make a statement denouncing events in Paris and completely failing to mention the thousands slaughtered in his own country in the same week. Helping us to make sense of it all is Ini Dele-Adedeji of the London School of Oriental and African Studies. Welcome to the Sputnik. Can we begin by trying to place Boko Haram on some kind of spectrum? Who are they? What are they? Are they Islamists? Are they terrorists? Are they both?
I think they could be defined as being both, although they would consider themselves obviously to be something different. If you ask them to define themselves, they'd probably say they are doing the work of God. But to those who are familiar and who've been targets of their attacks and who have felt their vengeance, they would say otherwise. I personally would say that they are Islamist terrorists who would like to carve out their own part of northern Nigeria in order to make it an Islamic caliphate.
Well, they're carving it out in blood, aren't they? In sectarian blood. They are singling out Christian people and massacring them, destroying places of worship, neither of which is remotely permitted by the Islamic religion.
Indeed.
So is there no cleric in Nigeria to be found to make a fatwa to excommunicate these people, or are people accepting that they are acting in the name of Islam?
I think you'll find that most people do not accept that they are acting on behalf of Muslims or in the name of true Islam. I know of a number of Islamic clerics in northern Nigeria who have come out at the risk of their own lives and the safety of their families to say that what the sect is doing, that is Boko Haram, is not Islamic at all and is not allowed in any of the Islamic scriptures at all. And many of them have either been killed or been targeted for assassination. Only just recently, in the middle of last year, during the fasting period, a popular cleric in northern Nigeria, Shika Dahiru Bauchi, who spoke out on numerous occasions against these bloodthirsty people, was attacked, and many of the people who had gathered to listen to his Ramadan tafsir were killed, actually. So it's a case where Boko Haram have alienated themselves from the communities in which they began and have alienated all rational Nigerians. And I think you'll find even within their own ranks, from what I've been told, there are members who have become disenchanted and disillusioned with whatever it is that their aims and objectives are, and would like to drop their weapons if they could safely do so, and if perhaps the government reaches out to them to try to...
Are they a local stroke national problem, or are they part of an international? They've recently declared that Borno, at least, will be a part of the Islamic State, the Caliphate, declared by a self-appointed individual in Mosul, in Iraq. Iraq is a long way from Nigeria. How credible is that claim that they are a part of an international?
Well, I think in terms of ideological inspiration, you could say that they are part of a larger global network of Islamist terrorism. But I don't quite think that they've reached that level yet, where we could see a collaboration between them and ISIS. But I do think that they began initially as a local problem, which led to them being ignored by the current regime of Goodluck Jonathan, and that gave them the opportunity to blossom into something larger. And what we see today is the effect of this sect not being contained and curtailed by the government, allowing them to mushroom into what could potentially become a transnational problem. Because as it stands at the moment, they've branched out beyond the borders of Nigeria to neighboring states like Cameroon, and even some of their members are reported to be hiding out in the Republic of Chad as well. So I think it's a problem that could have potential ramifications for neighboring countries, I think.
You mentioned Goodluck Jonathan. Never could a man have been less aptly named. He managed not just to ignore them, but to do so at the very time he was condemning far, far smaller outrages in Paris. What's that about?
I think, if anything, it just reflects the value of the average Nigerian life to Goodluck Jonathan's government, especially the lives of impoverished Nigerians in parts of the country where no one really cares for them or what they do or what happens to them. And I think that's sort of what we're seeing. I mean, we're only just getting to know now about the approximately 2,000 who died in the fishing town of Baga, but apparently the news only began filtering out of Baga a week after the attack actually took place, and it tells you a lot about not just the government but also how the military, the Nigerian military, is reacting to this scourge.
Well, you mentioned the Nigerian military, which have in the past had a, frankly, fearsome reputation, and their military prowess is much used by the African Union in peacekeeping operations, by the United Nations. How come they're performing so pitifully against this gang?
It's quite interesting to notice the decline in the military prowess, as it were, of the Nigerian army. I mean, close to a decade ago, Nigeria used to be considered the big brother to all the other African nations. When there was crisis in Liberia, Sierra Leone, the Congo, Nigeria was always the first to send out troops. Nigeria always contributed the highest amount of manpower to joint peacekeeping forces on the continent. But as it stands now, our military does not seem to have the ability to put a lid on what's going on in northeastern Nigeria, allowing Boko Haram to continue to take over more towns and potentially cities if they're not stopped.
I read that last year, 27 people per day died to Boko Haram-related violence. That accumulates to almost 10,000 last year. How does this phenomenon of the Boko Haram terrorist group, how does this play in the coming presidential election?
I was reading one of the local newspapers a few days ago, and I read something about there being a possibility of people in the ravaged, the affected towns being disenfranchised if the attacks continue. And I'm not quite sure if it's perhaps a political stratagem by the incumbent government to perhaps disenfranchise those the people in those areas because perhaps the president knows that he cannot count on them delivering votes in his favor at the polls, or if it actually comes from a genuinely altruistic position whereby the president genuinely cares enough for those people and wants to guarantee their safety. But I do suspect that the attacks will play a role in how the elections do turn out eventually.
Is he going to win these elections? How's this all going to end?
That's a difficult question to answer. But at the moment, the majority of the people I've engaged in informal discussions with on the state of the nation do not feel that if this present regime is allowed to carry on as it is, that there's going to be any hope for Nigerians collectively. And I think it's with the way Nigerian elections are known for going, it's likely that there might be post-election violence, or there might be a higher than usual rate of rigging. But I'm not quite sure that this regime is going to be allowed to carry on, especially because the president is considered to have failed on so many levels in terms of delivering the dividends of democracy to the Nigerian citizenry. Is considered to have failed in terms of guaranteeing the safety of Nigerians collectively. Is considered to have failed, and in terms of all the promises that all the promises that he made before the beginning of his first term, he is considered to not have delivered on any of them except on paper, and I think that will play a large role in how people decide to vote at the polls in February.
Well, it must be questionable whether Nigeria is going to continue as a single state on the basis of what's happening in the north. Once you lose control of a territory, you've effectively broken up as a country. And given the price Nigeria has already paid in the past half-century on that front, that would be a disaster indeed. Thanks very much for coming on board the Sputnik. Coming up after the break, down Mexico way, they're killing the children. Find out who's doing what to whom and why in the very center of the world. Welcome back to Sputnik. The world has become inured to massacres in Mexico, where people are murdered in their hundreds, usually connected to the raging drug traffic across the country's border with the United States, where there's a voracious hunger for junk of every kind.
4 months ago, on September 26, 43 students from the rural college on their way to a protest in the town of Iguala were kidnapped, murdered and buried in shallow graves. The local mayor, José Luis Abarca Velázquez, and his wife, Maria de Los Angeles Pineda Villa, are claimed to have masterminded the abduction and killing.
The events caused social unrest, nationwide protests, international condemnation, and is arguably the biggest political and security scandal the Mexican presidency has ever faced. Mexicans, in their great majority, are finally saying enough is enough when it comes to the rotten, corrupt political class which has misruled the country for decades. The London-Mexico Solidarity Group is active in Britain, and I'm glad they join us now on board the Sputnik. Claudio, Garcia, Ehrenfeld and Denise Drake. Welcome to the Sputnik. I want to ask a general question first. Where does the criminal class end and the political class begin in Mexico? Or are they one and the same?
Well, I think that is the question that most Mexicans are trying to answer now. There is not a clear line for the general public between criminal organizations and the Mexican government. And the Ayotzinapa case proves that drug cartels and the Mexican government are simply implicated in every single, at every single level of the government. Both these people, the mayor and his wife, are actively collaborating with drug cartels. To the date, they haven't been convicted for the Ayotzinapa case. They have been convicted for some other reasons, but not because of that. At the same time, they have been protected by the Mexican government. At least
Why did the Mexican government do that?
Yes, at least 6 months ago, the Mexican government knew that Abarca was a part of a drug cartel organization, and they didn't do anything to stop it. On the other hand, recently, it was released by Hernandez, a famous journalist in Mexico, that the military and the federal police were tracking down the students with a C4 communication system, which means that, you know, the federal government, the army, the federal police, the municipal police, the mayor, all the levels of the government are involved in this crime, and that it could have been avoided.
What danger were these students to these criminals?
That is a question I cannot answer. I think these students are politically active, but it is unthinkable that in the 21st century, these kind of political crimes are still being going on. So I think we don't have an answer yet to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like something from the 1970s, 1980s, when the death squads were roaming around many parts of Latin America. The idea that they could get away with a crime like this is what baffles me. Denise?
Well, and just to mention about the students in the 70s and the 60s, the students were raising funds to go to a protest in Mexico City, which was to commemorate the October 2nd, 1968 massacre of students.
Coincided with the
Olympics.
The Olympic Games,
yes.
When huge numbers of students were gunned down. But in those days, these kind of things were possible for regimes. They got away with it. 5 decades later, the same political system is still in place. But as Claudio says, in the 21st century, it's impossible to imagine that such a story will not traverse the world. I'm presuming that it's a big issue in Latin America.
It is a really big issue. Unlike some other Latin American countries, Mexico has not had trials of justice, say like in Guatemala, where the society is able to convict the military or the government in these kind of crimes.
Well, and just to add, these kind of crimes will continue to occur until the people rise up and say, we've had enough. And that's exactly what the Zapatistas are doing in Chiapas. And the students that were disappeared were born out of that same tradition. The school, Ayotzinapa, was one of the rural schools that was established after the Mexican Revolution. And it was established to help small farmers and their families and their children to learn to read, to write, to better farm, or to have or to pursue opportunities in the city. And that is what is so threatening, is people making decisions about their own lives and demanding autonomy.
You mentioned the Chiapas a couple of times. Tell us, enlighten us a bit about it.
Well, Chiapas, for people who don't know, in Chiapas, there is a movement called the Zapatistas. And the Zapatistas broke onto the world stage, onto public light in 1994 on the dawn of NAFTA. When the US and Mexico and Canada signed that free trade agreement, on midnight, January 1st, 10,000 Zapatista soldiers flooded out of the mountains, the canyons, the jungles of Chiapas, and took over 7 different towns. And they said, yeah, basta, enough is enough. They wore they wore ski masks, or they had bandanas, kerchiefs across their face, and they said, "We are the voiceless, we are the faceless. You haven't heard us for 500 years, but that is over because this is not going to happen. We've been resisting since the Europeans came 500 years ago. You haven't killed us yet. We're still here, and we want out of this system. That NAFTA and free trade is not going to bring Mexico into the first world. First world, ha, 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 was one of their slogans.
So they're all indigenous mostly?
They are people of Mayan descent. There are people of mixed heritage who have chosen to join them, but by and large, it's an indigenous movement. They are fighting for the lands and the territories that belong to their ancestors for millennium.
And how is the government responding to them?
Oh, with repression and crackdowns, but they will just keep fighting. I mean, their strength is they never surrender, they will not be co-opted, and they never give up.
But it hasn't spread across Mexico, and it couldn't, because it is largely based in Chiapas and amongst indigenous people. And its brand of politics is not, at this point in time at least, going to rally the support of the great majority of Mexicans. But the great majority of Mexicans may be beginning to turn against the political system nonetheless. Is that accurate?
I think that's accurate. I would like to say that the Zapatistas are an inspiration for many groups in resistance in Mexico. Many times because they are dealing with environmental activism. So, for instance, in Puebla, there are hundreds of political detainees who have been trying to, you know, fight against mega projects of the government.
For the Zapatistas, the political struggle is not about a realignment of the actors. It's a horizontal vision, and it is about and it's not about the model spreading either. The Zapatistas are happy to share what they've accomplished, and they invite people in, because that's the only way you're going to learn about that, is to go visit them themselves. And they share stories. Just here at the end of the year, we had the Worldwide Festival of Rebellions and Resistances against capitalism. And what the Zapatistas want to do is to share ideas and everybody to localize their own struggle. That we may have some underlying common values and some underlying other things that bring us together, but everything has to be localized and figured out by people themselves. You can't photocopy a revolution.
What's gone wrong in Mexico? You mentioned the Mexican Revolution, a very inspirational revolution. Mexico, for a long time, in geopolitics, played a progressive role. It seems to me, as a quite a distance observer, that Mexico has gone very badly wrong in recent years.
Well, yes, I think the majority of the people are facing dispossession, a low-paid salary. If you look at the model that the Mexican government is advertising, well, it's basically one form of slavery where you get paid nothing, and you work for hours and hours a day for a CEO or something like that. On the other hand, the democracy in Mexico is at bias, and I think the Zapatistas are an inspiration for many Mexicans in that regards as well, in the sense that there is not a single party that Mexicans can trust. So the question now is if...
That's true in many countries, including this one.
I guess that's right, but the question is different once the politicians start kidnapping students.
Sure.
So I think now people are starting to recognize why there was a campaign like La Otra Campaña. La Otra Campaña was a campaign asking people not to vote. Nowadays, you have the activist Javier Sicilia asking exactly the same question. Do not vote. Because giving your vote to a political party is basically supporting a criminal organization.
What a pity. Well, look, the best of luck to the London, Mexico Solidarity Group. If there's anything that we can do to help you, we're happy to do so. Thanks for coming on the Sputnik. And now it's your turn to tell us what you think through the portals of social media. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Well, whatever happened to the 276 girls that were kidnapped by Boko Haram? Mark Desai answers, it backfired the moment that Michelle Obama tweeted that bring back our girls selfie, and then it got rocked, swept along with the MH17 preliminary report.
No, I think that the Goodluck Jonathan mishandled it badly. He could either have fought or negotiated. In the end, he did neither.
On Mexico, we've got our very own Stacy from the Kaiser Report in Mexico at the moment, and she tweets that I am currently in Mexico and every single local I've asked says the US-financed drug war needs to end as it just kills too many. Mexico today is like the USA in the 20s, when prohibition led to violent mafia gangs and corrupt politicians.
Well, if that's what our Stacey says, and she's in Mexico, who am I to argue?
Well, that's all that we have for this week.
Which, alas, means that's the end of the show.
You can stay in touch with us on Twitter at RT_Sputnik, and on Facebook you can like us on Sputnik on Russia Today. It's goodbye from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous.